First, actually, I want to talk about how I heard about you first. Many years ago, I was, of course, training with George, and he went to New York, and he told me, I got tapped out 5 times in 5 minutes by a guy named John. And you were still rolling back then,
Yes.
regularly. You were still training hard and rolling back then. And I was like, 5 times in 5 minutes? It's like impossible. Now, at that time, we had rolled it with a few black belts already. Jiu-Jitsu was just kind of starting up in Montreal. There was only 1 or 2 black belts in the city. And I had rolled with black belts and George rolling with black belts, and we weren't getting tapped that much. So I really didn't believe George. I thought maybe, it was more in his head, and, he was just maybe overly excited or whatnot. And then I remember going down to meet you for the first time. Actually, we trained together. First time it was Las Vegas, I believe.
It was at Las Vegas.
Las Vegas.
Was it the BJ Penn, the first BJ Penn fight?
Was it? Was it that fight?
I believe it may have been.
Right.
Because that was the first time I cornered George.
Okay,
and
okay.
That's the first time I met you.
Yeah. And we ended up rolling together.
I remember we went on was it like a Friday morning or something when George was weighing in. We went downstairs.
To wrestle.
And yeah.
And I remember you like tapping me out like every 30 seconds.
But you were just a young man back then.
Yeah, but still, I mean, we're still tough. We're competing at UFC level, training at that level. And we were just getting crushed. And we're like, man, your jiu-jitsu was so sophisticated. And you started training at the age of 28.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you started late in life. John started very late in life. And it was incredible how sophisticated your jiu-jitsu was very early on. Like, how did you develop your system?
The main thing I looked at was to look at what is the founding principle of the sport. And for most people in those days, it was the idea of position before submission.
Mm.
And I thought that was a wonderful, succinct way of putting it. And I think it was very effective for most people. But I thought to myself, well, when they talk about position, what do they really mean? And what you clearly see is what's meant by the idea of position is control. And when it dawned on me that the real way of expressing it was not position before submission, but control before submission, then you got to understand there are many ways to control the human body that go far beyond just the simple positional game of jiu-jitsu. And that control can be exerted from top, bottom, standing ground, anywhere. And once I started saying, okay, let's put the emphasis on control before submission rather than just position. Position is just a subset of control.
It's too vague of a term, almost.
It was actually, it's pretty well clarified in jiu-jitsu in terms of the positional structure, side control, north-south, etc. It's pretty well defined. But the problem was it was just a subset of what's possible. And once you started to expand that and bring in the idea of ashigarami, leg controls from bottom position, clamp controls for upper body, there were just so many things you could do. And once that was my mindset, my submission rate went up exponentially.
Yeah, I remember like you were doing leg locks even before the DDS movement. Way before. You were always into leg locks. You've never shunned the leg locks ever.
Yeah.
And
I was fortunate fairly early in my career to meet Dean Lister. We only met for a few minutes after a class when he was in New York, and he mentioned to me I watched him roll, and I was impressed by the fact that he was putting a heavy emphasis on lower body submissions, which was unheard of in those days. And
actually discouraged even.
Yeah, actively discouraged, yes. And when I talked to him about it, he said, why would you ignore 50% of the human body? And I was saying, that makes absolute sense. Like, why would you? And then you literally double your chances the moment you do that.
Your opportunities.
In fact, it's not even a question of doubling your chances. Most opponents, when you're playing bottom position, look to stand up on you. And so the upper body submission game more or less disappears. And so you're not even doubling your chances, you're quadrupling your chances by attacking the lower body first. Because most of the time your opponent will be standing as you play in bottom position, and the legs are right there in front of you to attack. And insights like those made a significant impact on my game fairly early on.